Alan, welcome to Q.
Hello. You know what's really it? I'm watching you talk, and you smile while you talk. Is that deliberate? Do you do that? Is that a technique, or do you just are you happy about all these things you're saying?
I think I'm just kind of happy.
I never saw that before. That's really nice.
I'm just kind of excited you're here.
Well, me too. Thank you.
If I understood you, would I have this look on my face?
No, you wouldn't.
I know we're on the radio. I wouldn't be smiling so much. I know we're on the radio. What look are you talking about in the title of this book?
That look, that's a nice question, because that is really what the book is about, is observing one another so that we really make contact with the person we're trying to communicate with by noticing their body language, noticing all the clues we get from the facial expression, from the tone of voice, so that we can figure out whether what we're saying is landing on them or not. So would I have this parenthesis, puzzled, close parenthesis, look on my face if I understood you? And I mean, this is an active title now. The title points you toward what you can do to make communication better. The first title I had didn't work so much because it just showed what was wrong with the whole thing. The title was, Huh?
I feel like that's going to be in my headstone. Here lies Tom Power.
My but my headstone will say, "Would I have this look on my face?"
So what could we be doing if someone has a blank look on their face when you're trying to explain something? I guess that's a sign that it's not working.
Well, that's why we teach improvisation when we are helping people learn to communicate better. And these are not exercises in comedy improv. They're exercises in the kind of improvisation that gets you tuned into the other person, so you really observe them carefully. Mm-hmm. And when you get used to that, and it's not just something you can do because I give you the hint or the tip to do it, because I think tips go one in one ear and out the other. You got to really practice it. You got to practice observing the other person. And what happens is you automatically make changes in your own face, your own tone of voice. It gets more personal. And what you have to say is tuned in to what they're able to get. You can find out pretty rapidly, because you're thinking about it. What are they ready to hear? How deep are they ready to go? Or must I start back earlier? And this is not just talking about science. We've taught over 8,000 scientists and doctors in the last 8 years. And as we did that, I began to realize that it really applies to everybody, to parents and children, lovers, husbands and wives, people in sales, people in business. And the reason it applies is that everybody's trying to communicate with everybody else all during the day. And if it's perfunctory, if it's not based on me really connecting with you, then I don't really know if it's landing on you, what I really want you to, if I'm selling, if we're in the family, in the same family, and one of us wants to go to Disneyland and the other one wants to go to a national park, there's selling going on. There's communication in the process, and everybody needs to be satisfied. Everybody needs to find something good in the thing. So there's a negotiation. All of that has to do, if it's going to work, it's not going to be, I want to go there and that's it. It has to be a transaction between us, and that's going to happen best if I know what you're feeling, what you're thinking, where you are in your in your interior self. Then we can connect from inside me to inside you.
I feel like by the end of this interview, I'll be giving you my PIN number. Like, I feel like you're speaking directly into my soul.
Well, that's nice. It's nice in here.
There's one part of the book that I read, especially as someone in my world, but I think if you're listening to this, no matter where you are, you can understand this, that you find yourself talking to someone and you don't want to sound dumb. And that happens to me a lot because I have a tendency to, So when someone comes in and they're a novelist or they're a visual artist, I don't really know that much about what they're doing necessarily. So I try to read up as much as I can, and I try to know a lot, and then I'll ask some questions. And you had a really interesting chapter in this book about talking to scientists. That you did the same thing. You were going in there with all the science information that you had and trying to talk to them, and then you realized that the best thing you could do was to kind of admit that you know nothing.
Yeah, it was hard to admit that at first. I wanted to look like I knew at least something about what the scientists did. But here I was talking to people who had spent 20 or 30 years of their lives delving deeply into this specialty. How could I possibly know enough to ask them a question that was at their level? And when I read all their papers and thought I knew something about their work, enough to ask complicated questions, when I thought back on those interviews, I could remember this puzzled look on their face. It was really the same thing as the title of the book. There had been a look on their face of confusion and dismay because I was actually boxing them in with a question that didn't represent reality. It wasn't about their work at all. It was a misunderstanding of their work. And it's hard for them to say, ask me another question. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
You know?
So you would go in and say, like, what is this?
That's it. What? How does this thing work?
Right.
You know, what are you doing here? What do you mean about this thing, this evolution thing that you're studying, this special corner of it? How does that idea work?
How did they react to that? Like,
They loved it because they're natural teachers, and they want to know where you are, along the spectrum of understanding or knowledge, and so it made it much easier. And it's, I experienced this feeling of relief and freedom once I got used to admitting my ignorance. It really felt good because it's not a pose anymore. It's the actual reality. I think I understand this. Is this right or not? And then they say, no, not quite. It's more like this. And that all of a sudden I get information that I didn't have before. Mm-hmm. So it's a way to learn. Ignorance is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. It can be.
Well, if it's coupled with curiosity. Ignorance without curiosity, not so good.
Is this interest in communication and science, does this come from your acting background? I remember when I was in school and I was taking a psychology course at Memorial University in Newfoundland. It was one of those big, those big theater courses where there's 400 people in there.
Yeah.
And the screen goes up and Alda's on the screen doing science, and I had no idea. Where does this interest in science come from for you?
Since I was a kid, I was interested in science, even though I didn't sometimes know it was science. But I guess I pictured myself as a scientist when I was 6 years old. I had a card table on which I did experiments, things I called experiments. Mm-hmm. I would mix my mother's face powder with toothpaste and try to see if it would blow up.
Yeah.
That's what scientists did, I thought. Some actually did.
Yeah. And is this interest in communication, this must come from communicating for a living.
Yeah, that really, without realizing it, I was learning about communication from the time I was a child, learning about acting. And then, it's funny, I got in the middle of that sentence, and you naturally look down at your notes because you want to know where you are in your roadmap.
Well, we got about 8 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to it.
Yeah,
all.
but
I'm very aware I'm doing that too.
And the funny thing was, as soon as you looked down, I forgot where I was in the sentence. I was totally lost because up until then I was talking to you, and then I was talking to the statue. Mm-hmm. It's a trap when you really get into talking to people for real. Mm-hmm. If they get distracted, you get distracted. Mm-hmm. So where was I?
I feel like my salary is being docked every minute of this interview.
No, I only pointed that out because
I'm only kidding.
No, I know I didn't mean to embarrass you or anything.
Not at all.
But it really is a different experience to be connected to somebody, and it's a good thing that I lost track of what I was saying because that was a signal that I got to get back in sync with you somehow.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to talk about is you get people to speak gibberish to one another.
Yeah.
And that, by not saying any words at all, you find that that's a better way of communicating.
Well, one thing you have to do when you speak in gibberish and you have to try to communicate something like you're selling somebody a product, But you can't use English words. You have to speak in gibberish, which is a language that you make up that sounds like a language, but it doesn't exist.
Like what? Can you give me an example? Like I don't.
But
I want to think that someone just tuned into the radio at this
Yeah,
exact
that would be
moment. And was
great,
like, well, it's
yeah.
finally happened.
Yes, they've taken over.
So you're telling me that, but I can infer some meaning from what you just
Well,
said.
that's the idea. What you have to do is with your voice or with your body when you're doing gibberish, you have to communicate all the things that you would otherwise use words for. So you get better in touch with your body and the nonverbal ways of communicating.
What about verbal sync?
Verbal sync is an extension of a basic exercise in improv, which is mirroring, where the two of us put your hands up, but it's no good for the radio audience.
No, we got to get some TV, but I'll let you know we're putting our hands up.
Okay, so now you're my mirror. So whatever I do, you have to do it exactly as I'm doing it, as if you were my mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go too fast, that's kind of hard for you.
Yeah.
So what this teaches you, for one thing, at a very basic level, is that if I'm trying to communicate with you, it's up to me to make sure you're following me, as if you were my mirror in the mirror exercise. It's not up to you. I can't say to you, Schmo, get better,
Mm-hmm.
get with me. It's my responsibility. So if I'm giving you a lecture about something, or I'm trying to explain something to you about my life, or I'm trying to get a raise from you in the office, it's my job to keep you up with me, and not put you out in the cold.
Is the verbal sync when you speak at
Now,
the same time?
So what we do after people get used to this mirror thing, you actually can do it with speaking. For instance,
Can we try it?
yeah, you lead me this time. Tell me about a movie you saw or something like that. I'm your mirror now. I'm your vocal mirror.
I was watching Netflix the other night. And I didn't think I would want to watch House of Cards because CNN is House of Cards. But it turns out I did.
Yeah.
So what did we learn by just doing that?
Well, one thing we learned was that when you got so caught up in what you were saying, you zipped ahead. I couldn't keep up with you.
I'm also from Newfoundland, so that's trouble too.
Do you talk fast
we
up there?
speak very, very quickly.
You know, we say Newfoundland, and I guess we're all wrong.
No, it's understand or telegram. Like understand Newfoundland, telegram Newfoundland.
I don't understand what you just said. What do you mean?
Well, like it sounds like the word understand, or it sounds like the word telegram.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thank you.
My father used to say, "We don't speak quickly. You just listen too slow."
Yeah, he wasn't taking responsibility, but I'm sure he's a nice person.
He was a very, very nice man.
Yeah.
I only have you for a few more minutes, but it's funny we just mentioned CNN and we mentioned House of Cards, but we live in a time where it's getting harder for people to not just communicate, but to feel like they're living in a common reality, in the same reality. And you hear this term alternative facts. And how can people, from what you've learned in writing this book, communicate when they completely disagree with one another?
It's very interesting. There are exercises that we do that actually throw light on that. There's a principle in improvising called yes and, which you may have heard of. A lot of people talk about it now.
That's where you never say no?
Yeah. For instance, if we were acting a scene, if we were playing an improv on the stage, and we're both in the same scene, and you look down at the floor we're standing on, you say, wow, look at all that water. If I deny your reality, if I say, well, that's not water, that's the floor, I might get a laugh out of the audience, but I've completely destroyed the scene and I've made you look bad. And there's nothing more we can do after that. But if I say yes to it, if I say, yeah, look at that water, and look over there, look at that whale, let's swim out to that whale and catch on to him. Now I've added to it. That's the and part. So it actually is possible, although it's hard sometimes, to take what somebody says to you, even what you don't agree with, or maybe violently don't agree with, and say some kind of yes to it, and then add to it. Doesn't have to mean the yes is that, yes, I agree that the world is flat. That's kind of hard to agree to. But I can agree to the idea that you're trying to figure out how nature works. You're drawing on your intuitions and what you see. The world doesn't look round. It doesn't look like we're on a globe when we look out across a desert or we look at the ocean. But I can add to that by what I've experienced. I had that same feeling looking at the ocean once. And you know what I did? This was fun. I took a piece of paper that had a flat edge and I held it up to the ocean. On one side, the ocean was even with the paper, and on the other side of the paper, I saw the other part of the ocean, but the roundness of the ocean showed above the top of the paper. Wasn't that interesting? It looked round for the first time, and I had never seen that before. Maybe that'll make you think twice about the flat Earth. Maybe it'll give us both a chance, since neither of us has said you're stupid or crazy. Mm-hmm. Maybe it'll give us both a chance to talk more.
But as more communication happens online without this, I mean, we could easily be doing this interview over the phone. Or
I flew all the way up to Toronto.
Well, I appreciate it. I really do. Yeah, I'm sure that's what you're thinking about right now. I could have done this over the phone. Are we hopeless then in that most of our communication is done over text these days? We don't get those moments?
I don't know if we're hopeless. I see some hope in the communications that we make in email and even messaging. Because even though they're truncated messages, there's still this vestigial desire to know how it's landing on the other person. Because very often we'll put something down, we'll type something in, and we'll think, I wonder if this is going to be misunderstood. And that's when we'll use a smiley or an emoji. And it's an attempt to connect with the other person emotionally. So we still have that desire, and that's a good sign to me. So maybe we won't just get lost in a digital netherland.
Alan Alda, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you. What was the only way I could talk with you? The door was closed.
That's the best. That's the best. I don't know. I don't got to do the show anymore. The show's over forever. I mean, this is the last interview I'll ever do. Alan Alda's new book is about communication and empathy, things we could definitely use more of these days, but there's some hope. It's called If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? Alan Alda, join me live in studio. Come back, will you?
Thank you. That's a nice invitation. I had fun. Thank you very much.
I had a good time as well.